Zeitoun dropped his paddle and jumped into the water. He held his breath and swam to the porch. The steps came quicker than he thought. He jammed his knee against the masonry and let out a gasp. When he stood, the water was up to his neck. "You okay?" Frank asked. Zeitoun nodded and made his way up the steps. "Hello?" The voice now sounded hopeful. He tried the front door. It was stuck. Zeitoun kicked the door. It wouldn't move. He kicked again. No movement. With the water now to his chest, he ran his body against the door. He did it again and again. Finally, it gave. Inside, he found a woman hovering above him. She was in her 70s, a large woman, over 200 pounds. Her patterned dress was spread out on the surface of the water like a great floating flower. Her legs dangled below. She was holding on to a bookshelf. "Help me," she said. Zeitoun talked gently to the woman, assuring her that she would be taken care of. He knew that in all likelihood she had been there clinging to her furniture for 24 hours or more. An elderly woman like this would have no chance of swimming to safety, much less have the strength to cut a hole through her roof. At least the water was warm. She might not have survived. Zeitoun pulled her out the front door and caught a glimpse of Frank in the canoe. His jaw had gone slack, his eyes disbelieving. No one knew what to do next. It would be very difficult to fit a woman of her size into the canoe under normal circumstances, and lifting her into it would require more than 2 men. Even if they could lift her and fit her inside, they couldn't possibly fit all 3 of them. The canoe would certainly capsize. He and Frank had a quick, whispered conversation. They had no choice but to leave her and find help. They would paddle quickly to Claiborne and flag down a boat. They told the woman the plan. She was unhappy to be left alone again, but there was no choice. They reached Claiborne in a few minutes and immediately saw what they were looking for, a fan boat. Zeitoun had never seen one in person, but they were familiar from movies. This was a military model, loud, with a great fan anchored perpendicularly to the rear. It was headed directly toward them. Zeitoun thought it was very lucky to have found another craft so quickly, and he was filled with something like pride, knowing that he had promised help and could now deliver it. He and Frank positioned their canoe in the path of the boat and waved their arms. The fan boat came straight for them, and when it was close, Zeitoun could see that there were 4 or 5 uniformed officers aboard. He wasn't sure if they were police or military, but he was very happy to see them. He waved and Frank waved, both of them yelling, "Stop!" and "Help!" But the fan boat did not stop. It swung around the canoe, holding Zeitoun and Frank, not even slowing down, and continued down Claiborne. The men aboard the fan boat barely glanced at them. The fan boat's wake nearly tipped their canoe. Zeitoun and Frank sat still, gripping either side until the waves subsided. They hardly had time to exchange incredulous looks when another boat came their way. Again, it was a fan boat, also with 4 military personnel aboard. And when Zeitoun and Frank waved and called for help, again the fan boat swung around them and continued without a word. This happened repeatedly over the next 20 minutes. 10 of those vessels, all staffed by soldiers or police officers, ignored their canoes and their calls for assistance. Where were these boats going? What were they looking for if not for residents of the city asking for help? Defied belief. Finally, a different sort of boat approached. It was a small fishing boat manned by 2 young men. Though Zeitoun and Frank were disheartened and unsure if anyone would stop, they gave it a try. They stood in the canoe, they waved, they yelled. This boat stopped. "We need help," Frank said. "Okay, let's go," the men on the boat said. The young men threw a line to Zeitoun, who tied it to the canoe. The motorboat towed Zeitoun and Frank to the woman's house, and once they were close, the young men cut the engine and coasted toward the porch. Zeitoun jumped into the water again and swam to her door. The woman was exactly as they'd left her, in her foyer, floating near the ceiling. Now they only had to figure out how to get her into the fishing boat. She couldn't lift herself into the boat. That wasn't an option. She couldn't drop down into the water for leverage. It was too deep, and she could not swim. "You have a ladder, ma'am?" one of the young men asked. She did. She directed them to the detached garage at the end of the driveway. Zeitoun dropped into the water, swam to the garage, and retrieved it. When he brought it back, he set it on the ground and against the boat. The plan was that the woman would let go of the bookshelf, grab the ladder, put her feet onto it, and climb up until she was above the boat and able to step into the hull. Zeitoun held the ladder while the two young men steadied it against the boat, ready to receive her. It seemed an ingenious plan. But she couldn't climb the ladder. She had a bad leg, she said, and couldn't put pressure on it. It took a certain degree of agility, and she was 80 years old, weakened by staying awake for 24 hours while floating near her ceiling, thinking only that she might drown in her own home. "I'm sorry," she said. There was only one option now, they decided. They would use the ladder as a sort of gurney. They would prop one end of the side of the fishing boat, and one of the young men could stand on the porch holding the other side. They would then have to lift it high enough to get her over the lip of the boat, and far enough in that she could roll on into the hole. Zeitoun realized that two men, one on either end of the ladder, would not be enough to lift a woman of over 200 pounds. He knew he would have to push from below. So when the two young men were in position and the woman was ready, Zeitoun took a deep breath and went under. From below the surface, he could see the woman let go of the bookshelf and grab the ladder. It was awkward, but she managed to place herself atop of it, as if it were a kind of raft. As she put weight on the ladder, Zeitoun positioned his shoulders under it and pushed up. The motion was akin to a shoulder press machine he'd once used at a gym. He straightened his legs, and as he did, the ladder rose from the water until he saw light breaking the surface, until he felt the air on his face and was finally able to exhale. The woman rolled into the bed of the boat. It was not a graceful landing, but she managed to sit up. Though she was wet and breathing heavily, she was unhurt. Zeitoun shuddered as he watched her recover. It was not right to watch a woman of her age suffer like this. The situation had stolen her dignity, and it pained him to bear witness. Our next reader is Caroline Paulson.